So I just start off with a couple of questions. You take it wherever you want to go.
Sure.
But I think for the general audience, I think there's a lot of misconceptions about critical race theory. There's a lot of resistance, especially in Texas, but elsewhere. And you have taught this for many years. Can you just tell us what critical race theory is?
Yeah, thank you. So critical race theory is an approach, it's a theoretical perspective that exists primarily at the university level. It may be taught in some places in K-12, but I think for the most part it's a higher ed phenomenon. And it can be described as a pedagogy as well, so it's not so much like content for some professors, but more like viewing race and racism, white supremacy, prejudice, white privilege, and things like that from the lens of historic racism that is institutional, that's structural, and is not really about, I'm so sorry. It would come out and start barking here.
That's okay, we'll let it go. You were on such a roll here, there too.
Well, I can finish the thought.
Yeah, we're gonna have to. I mean, we're gonna lose light, so we gotta keep rolling.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't know. I mean, I can't control a dog. Can you control that dog?
No, you can't control it. I just thought, yeah. So,
I'm so sorry.
no. It was really good. So just kind of taking about the pedagogy at the university level and.
Yeah, I mean, and so it comes out of critical legal studies, and it became an approach in education for many of us, not really until the 1990s, when scholars were applying it to Latino education that wanted to look not only at race, but how race intersects with class and sexuality and other factors that really structure opportunity. So it's really not about looking at racism at the individual level in terms of being racist toward a particular person, displaying prejudice or animus, but it's really the opposite. It's looking at systems as a whole. So technically you could have racisms without racists, because racist systems, they reproduce the existing structure of inequality, right? And so middle class kids get middle class jobs, working class kids get working class jobs, and there's this stubborn relationship between these factors and outcomes that call for a look at the policies, the norms, the regulations, the structures, the practices that just like a machine on their own reproduce these outcomes.
Right. Well, let me ask you a question. My specialty is colonial America, so we get into 1619, where the first slaves were dropped off from Africa by the Dutch in Jamestown, Virginia. I talk about slavery throughout all my courses. I think now especially I'm talking about more racism against Latinos, and many people say, and you've been aware that people would focus on. I've been teaching critical race theory my whole life. Not this idea. I've always talked about race, and I've always talked about violence. And I think there's a movement now for more for systemic racism. The institutions, the foundations, not all of this. So how does that differ? Let's just say that I'm a historian, that I've always looked at these particular issues, and now I'm hearing about critical race theory.
It's almost one and the same. The difference is that critical race theory aligns a certain array of ideas together, an assemblage that become tenets to which theorists abide, like being intersectional. So it's never just about race. By seeing race as a core organizing principle of society. Not everybody believes that. And so if you're Marxist, then you would see class as an organizing feature of society at its core. And in fact, many people have been dissatisfied with class analysis, including Marxist analysis, because it doesn't look intersectionally always at how race also works in tandem with class to reproduce inequality in society. So in a way, it's really been around probably since people were first discriminated against. The sort of the modern articulation of that is just one that coalesces an assemblage of tenets that I think help guide the reader toward certain core understandings. There's a lot in there. I mean,
Sure.
there's like interest convergence, that kind of hypothesis, the racial fortuity hypothesis, counter stories, the importance of experience, like I said, intersectionality. So there's things that coalesce into frameworks that now are themselves evolving. There's tribal
Sure.
crit, there's
So
femme
it's
crit,
something
there's
that's very fluid.
it's very fluid and very critical. I mean, it's very much like putting on a pair of glasses, a lens through which you understand phenomenon, and that's always happened, like you're saying.
Yeah.
But now it's formalized into
Yeah.
a set of tenets or principles or assumptions.
Very articulate, explaining all of that. Why is there such vociferous opposition by white Texas Republicans to the teaching of CRT?
So this is part of a really well-heeled campaign that's coming out of the Heritage Foundation that was, I think, first articulated by Christopher Rufo, who has published some conservative pieces that even Trump got a hold of and decided to use these as a basis for shutting down diversity and equity initiatives within Washington. And since it works so successfully as a wedge issue, and it's a way to incite people around, because of their own fragility around issues of race, it I think has really just exploded as a tactic through which to polarize society. And when you polarize society, it means that I think the gamble is you get more people to vote for your platform or for your agenda, and you're able to distinguish the liberal left from the right, and that is what polarization gains you. And it's good for races. It's good fodder.
Yeah. Some educators have argued that critical race theory is divisive and is designed to make people feel guilty about their racial identity or identify as an oppressor or as oppressed. Another concern raised is that we are indoctrinating students and that it is counterproductive to focus on racial issues. How would you respond to that?
Critical race theory is just one framework, and there's many frameworks, and so not even in the college classroom do people like solely teach one framework. I've been teaching a course on race and racism for over 20 years, and CRT is just one of those frameworks. And so, I mean, it's a very helpful framework. Like I said, it brings together a lot of different assemblages of thought, critical thought, and a perspective that's really anchored in the experience of the personal experience of racism and how we can tell a different story, right, from the one that we're just assumed to abide by, which is this white racial imaginary that is.
That jet and the dog together are just too much.
What is it?
The
The
jet.
jet and the dog.
They just started to come out. The jet will fly over in a minute.
Yeah, I don't know what the dog is after, what the dog's barking for.
I wonder.
He's angry with critical race theory. Doesn't want that.
Wish I
So if you
could-
can repeat that last part again, I'm sorry.
Now, I'm just curious, will you be able to edit any of this? Is it gonna?
That dog's gonna be difficult, yeah.
Yeah, well, this is such a good interview, and I just, so.
I don't know what to do with it.
And you just started.
As soon as we started.
I don't know. Amelia might could go in next door and tell the neighbors to get the dog in.
I hate to. Oh,
Let me call Amelia. I'll call him.
Okay. It's bad.
Emilio?
As soon as we ask.
So the dog next door is barking. I don't know what happened. He just started barking, and it's making it difficult to do the interview. No, it's not our dog. It's next door. I don't know if you can go talk to the Kennedys and ask them to take their dog in.
Yeah, it's not just a subtle.
Well, just tell them that we have a film crew here. I don't know.
I don't mind doing
It'll
it.
affect you too.
Okay, I'll do it then. You got-
The gardener, if you-
I don't mind doing it. I don't.
So is it the dog over there?
Yeah, I mean it's really kind of crazy loud and.
It's a bad neighbor. I can't tell
Okay.
anything.
Is there? How about giving the dog food or something?
He's doing boys.
Even worse, right?
I don't know what he's. Sounds like somebody who's been neglected. Is kind of the.
Yeah, maybe he's just hungry.
How you doing? Is the dog okay? We're doing an interview over here. Think you can take him in? Inside? Huh? Over there? Well, if you could take him in, I'd appreciate it.
We won't be that long.
It won't be very long.
That's a lie, but anyway. Thank you. I would have done it.
This guy, camera's not on. He's an asshole. Really bad. I mean, he screamed at me for no reason at all. He called me names and shit. Out
He's
of the blue.
That's the name of our documentary. He's an asshole. With a meeting this morning.
My brother and his wife sold their house and moved it to a neighbor. It just kept escalating.
No, with this guy, and I never talked to him. He must be surprised. He wouldn't even look at me when I was talking to him. He's pissed at me.
he's a racist guy.
Maybe he can come over for an interview.
Maybe he goes see me.
He'd be
I
good
heard
for your
you- I
documentary.
heard you was a racist, and I was just wondering, mate, if you wouldn't mind popping over with your dog.
It's nice and quiet now, so let's go.
Oh, okay. So let me give. We have a question here. That I.
If you want to start over, that's fine too. 'Cause-
Oh yeah, I don't. But I'm trying to worry about your time and.
well, this is important, and
Is
so
that
Yeah.
critical? I mean,
I'm
very interested in this.
I'm
Yeah,
not.
you're very articulate too. I don't know what you're saying, but you're very articulate when you do it. I'm just looking. Oh yeah, I'll read it again. It's a short one anyway. Some educators have argued that critical race theory is divisive and designed to make people feel guilty about their racial identity or identify as an oppressor or as oppressed. Another concern raised is that we are indoctrinating students and that it's counterproductive to focus on racial issues. Your response?
To view critical race theory as divisive is to really be reductive and to reduce it to the idea that it intends to be divisive. Critical race theory is a framework that intends to educate on the extensiveness of structural oppression in society of which race is not only a part but is centered in the analysis. When we think of the history of segregation, we don't segregate by gender. We don't segregate by sexuality. We segregate by race and class, and they overlap with each other. And so we have to be intersectional as well. It provides an analysis. If you want to understand how we got to where we are today and why there are structural issues with poverty, and it's stubborn and things don't change, then critical race theory helps you to get a handle on that from a deep look at the history and the politics and the policies that create that. And so to say that it's divisive is a tactic to polarize, because the ones who are opposed to critical race theory, who mostly don't know anything about critical race theory, not people in the Texas state legislature who are calling for anti-critical race theory literature, they are wanting to shut down discussions of any critical type pertinent to their own history of white supremacy, to the ways in which they themselves have been perpetrators. And it's even deeper than that to look at ways in which even ourselves as individuals can be both victims and perpetrators, because we might be progressive, we might be liberal, but we might actually inhabit institutions that recreate racism.
It's a very interesting thing that this is only new for me, but white entitlement is something we hear all about. I mean, I know in the last several years, I never thought about entitlement when I was growing up, but I didn't have, all the people I grew up with were white, so we didn't sit around and talk about white entitlement, and we often don't think about those foundations that support that kind of racism. And I think it's very hard to kind of come clean and say, boy, I never thought about that. And it seems kind of like that's what, it seems to me from what you're saying, it's almost like a liberation if you take it in a positive way, if you learn about why this started and you become educated. What I find, and in this kind of social media world, the firestorms all over the country about people that know nothing about critical race theory. I mean, all plastered over, Facebook or whatever. No critical race theory, no discussion of race, no indoctrination, all over the country. But you'd stop and say, "Do you know what critical race theory?" I haven't the foggiest idea what it is. But
Right.
but we don't want that kind of stuff taking place in the class. That's interesting. I think I'm quoting you here, so if it sounds familiar, well, I do it. The current anti-critical race theory debate is fully about turning a blind eye and negating disparities between whites and people of color while enhancing the power and privileges of white people. Racism's greatest power is both to reinscribe not only the idea of white identity to begin with, but also to socialize whites into being prejudicial and discriminatory while erasing the histories of people of color, the vast majority of whom are native to this continent. Can you break that down for us?
Yeah, for sure. Whiteness, being white, came into existence with the consolidation of slavery in the early to mid 18. I'm sorry. Can I start over? Sure. Whiteness came into being with the consolidation of slavery in the early to middle 1600s. There's no white country. White people come from somewhere. White people exists in relation to black people and indigenous peoples and people of color. It's a relational concept that comes with an ideology of supremacy and hierarchy that came from Europe. This idea of certain people having souls and spirits and others not having souls and spirits reflected the European thinking at the time of savages and certain individuals that are not savable. I mean, you can't save them. They're not human. They're subhuman, and so that these kinds of logics applied then in the world that was invaded. Some call it the New World, but it was an invasion, and they applied these concepts that came from Europe that had to do with hierarchy and with objectifying Native peoples who they saw as different and reducing them to the category of members of a subhuman caste.
One book that was very influential for me is they called them greasers, and in that first sentence of the whole book, I'm paraphrasing, but it's the kind of question that's being asked: if Anglos had never met a Tejano, never had contact with a Tejano, why this animosity? Why this hatred? Why the violence that takes place? And I couldn't help but notice, and I said there's in the article that I wrote, but a fascination, a preoccupation, people detesting, color, and the variant of color people described as copper or tan or a swarthy cinnamon or black or jet black, the way people look. And I said, of all the readings, the diaries, the literature of the period, there's one word from Anglos that stands out more than any other word that I have found, and it was mongrel. All right, the mongrel race, the mixed races, and people like Sam Houston or John C. Calhoun or other people. Why would we ever mix with the phlegm of Mexico. Why would anybody who is white mix with anybody who's a Mongol race? And you hear it again and again. What is a Mongol? Do they have Spanish blood, Negro blood, Tejano blood? Is it a mixture of all that? So it seems that color was very, very important. It's almost, in some ways, I can think of Elizabethan, England, that blackness is equated with the devil and dirt and sin, and white represents purity and things like that. So it seems to me that this racialization of Tejanos and Mexicans was set up very, very early, and I think it continues with us today. I mean, you hear some of the same tropes that were used in the 1830s that are still being used today, and people don't really question them. The lazy Mexican, the over-sexualized, Mexican woman, the drug dealers, the rapist, all of those things, they seem to have a long history here. So, Texas Republican Congressman Tan Parker argued that in 1836, his 1836 legislation is exclusively about celebrating Texas and is named for the year that the Texans gained their independence from Mexico. I wrote, of course, this is a thinly veiled attempt to whitewash Texas's dark history of racism and slavery. As University of North Texas professor Amanda Vickery shared with the Dallas Morning News, and I quote, "It's about reasserting whiteness and focusing on when white people founded the state." By choosing 1836 as the origin of Texas, the Republicans have sought to erase the histories of those people residing before. Do you agree with that assessment?
I agree with Dr. Vickery's assessment, yes. They're trying to paint a triumphalist perspective that they're the victors of war and therefore we merit this centrality, this exceptional positioning of history because of, they would say, all of the wonderful things that came out of this, including Texas and development and the things that they want to point to today as the technological heights, right? The advances that we've made, without which they would not have been possible had we not had this this war, this war with Mexico, and that is just so problematic of a statement because there's no critique, no internal critique, no concern. There's no compassion or caring. Even the language that they use is about dominance and dominating. There's no desire to reconcile. There's no like movement to even just meet the historians and the people halfway, right? There's no overtures, and so it's hubris. It's self-serving. It's narrow-minded,
right?
And it just helps reinscribe the Anglo-dominant majority in Texas.
Right.
That's what that's about.
It seems to me, and I remember Stephen F. Austin saying that when he came into Texas, it was a desert, and he made it blossom, and it became the Garden of Eden. And it's almost part of that Texas creation myth. Everything begins with white people, begins in 1836, and it negates all the other civilizations that came before. So we're not talking about indigenous populations, we're not talking about Tejano populations, we're not talking about the Spanish, we're not talking about African American, and it does, and I think obviously that is done on purpose. Let's focus on whiteness and the creation of this mythology, and let's get rid of everything else. I think the other question, I think, comes, if you take on include other people, become more inclusive. I want to know about Tejano history and Mexican history and African American. I want to go to the indigenous population. There's all that baggage that comes with it, meaning, and this is very interesting. I'm 62 years old, so I grew up with Texas mythology, even in California, and the Alamo mythology, and it's like these people came and they gave their lives and they knew they wouldn't be reinforced, and they died at the Alamo for liberty and freedom and oppressive Mexican government. never mentioning the institution of slavery.
Right.
Right? Did you fight so that you could preserve that? But if you have that part of the story, then you have to include the slavery and the racism, and there seems to be a real resistance. I know one of the critiques of me was I kind of singled out white Republicans. I told people if I saw Democrats in Texas really going against critical race theory or coming up with the 1836 project, I'd be critiquing them too. I'm just looking at who's passing the legislation,
Right.
what kind of leadership is there, where's the resistance to critical race theory, why can't we look at the 1619 project just critically? There are very prominent historians that I know. I'm a historian, very prominent historians that are critical of the 1619 project, but not having that dialogue at all. And it really seems to me it's like we want to focus on one thing and we'll negate everybody else that came before. And one of the questions that I'd like to ask at the Alamo, I want an inclusive story of the Alamo. If the indigenous population are left out, they should be in. If the Tejano population is left out, I'd like to let people know who built the mission.
Right.
And the other thing is, if we're talking about the Alamo, why aren't we talking in 1718? Why are we not going back 300 years?
Right.
You have the UNESCO World Heritage Sites that they want to talk about all the missions, and then let's go back to 1836. I mean, you can see, all that, how that stuff is is laid out.
Yeah, I'd like to comment. Yeah, I think that.
For a second, just the jet.
Oh yeah, the jet.
I'll let it fly over you while you were talking.
That's okay. I don't have nothing to say. Anything really important.
We can always get you again.
Yeah, we have an interview with Chris Tomlinson for Forget the
good.
Alamo tomorrow.
Oh, good.
And Martha Menchaca in the morning. And then I think John Moran Gonzalez and Monica Munoz. I'm sorry, I'm having difficulty saying everybody's name. I'm
You got
busy,
it.
tired.
You got it
Monica
down.
Munoz Martinez and all that. So I figure that if we get the 8 interviews, we've done pretty well. Then go to the Alamo. We have a permit to film at the Alamo, and also. And
That's good.
I have 3 guests to talk about the Alamo, so I'm trying to shake it up a little bit and get a little chemistry and yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so you want to do
Yeah,
this?
I mean, I think an issue is that people who want to preserve this triumphalist perspective of history, they don't want to imagine any claims that people have who were here before 1836, and it's what's going on is that I think they see it as demeaning or belittling of their own identities as also members of communities from somewhere in the world. And for the most part, those origins are not from this continent, right? Those in power. At the same time, it's not just a white people problem. Black and brown people, they also are impacted by notions of white supremacy and take them in themselves as a sense of their own identity, including a Tejano identity, right, or a Texan identity.
Yeah, one of the
because they buy into the myths of white
Yeah.
supremacy.
I didn't mean to
Yeah.
interrupt you. One of the things I remember in early, maybe 1830s, where people would come in and understand that you had the white Texians there, and they would say, "We're from the Canary Islands. We're from the Iberian Peninsula. We're not." And then people, okay, that's great. And people learn to play the game. So you're, as far as status goes, and you're part of the hierarchy. And then they found out that many of those people in the Canary Islands had already had mixed relationships before they ever came over. But the idea was, well, you learn how to play the game. You're Spanish. You're not, you're not an Indio. You're not, a Tejano. You're not. I'm from the Canary Islands, and then you kind of play this. One of the things that I learned from both professors that I looked at was that there's not a monolith when you talk about like Tejanos, what their goals are, what their aspirations are, what they're fighting for, and I was thinking about identity problem. I was sharing this in Northern Ireland. they will, by their admission, just tell you they have an identity problem, and they don't know if they're Catholic, they don't know if they're Protestant, they don't know if they're British, they don't know if they're Irish, they don't know if they're Unionist. I mean, what they're trying to say is they're so conflicted because of things that have been superimposed upon them. And in the last interview, we're talking about, with Frank de la Teja, it's like, okay, these Tejanos were asked to give up being Spanish, and then they were asked to give up being Mexican, then they were asked to give up being Tejano, and then they were supposed to be part of the Anglos. It's like, who are they? What is their identity? What do they share? We have this baggage. You come Spanish, Tejano, Mexican, Texan. What are you? And so it seems to me that it must be very hard, and there must be an identity problem of knowing what you stand for. And I think that's a very interesting thing too when people look at, like you can say a Tejano and you know exactly what you're talking about. What does that mean?
Well, we were colonized by the Spanish as well, so it's really two levels of colonization, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then you have the Anglo colonization, and so many of us are re-indigenizing, and we are connecting to our indigenous pasts. It's an area of inquiry, it's an area of practice, it's an ideology that pushes back against colonial thought, that calls for hierarchy, for objectifying the other, for treating things linearly, right? As if history is linear, when history is convoluted, it's crooked, it's not always a straight shot.
Right.
Even if we write in a straight shot, it's complicated. And so
Just one busy airport.
Well, it's getting close to 5, so.
Yeah.
Or 3 or whatever. What time is it here?
It's almost
this
5.
This one's on LA time, so it's 5.
Yeah, it's 3 at home.
when did y'all arrive?
Yesterday.
Oh my God, incredible.
Yeah, we always hit the ground running.
I'm sure.
We did this in Turkey. We did
I met
this.
him in Istanbul.
Yeah, but it's funny.
Y'all are amazing.
I've got a guilt. It's like the kid that calls in sick and he's not, and then feels guilty the whole day. It doesn't really work. And whenever I'm working for, like say, for MUVAC, I feel like, oh my God, what if I'm having a beer and dinner? Are they going to be, I've got to give back and say, hey, we had all these guests and we did this particular show and all that kind of stuff. So I work Jim and I pretty hard, but I hope that I think that the goal is really collaboration and being able. Can you tell this? I can't tell the whole story. I'm starting to get a rough, superficial
She's got limited time.
periphery. I know. I'm waiting for you.
I said it was good.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Okay. I thought I was waiting on you. That's why.
Well, I thought I said something.
Okay. All right. So one of the things I think is very interesting is following the El Paso massacre. El Paso native and historian David Dorado Romo argued, and I quote, "White supremacy is something we've had to deal with for decades. It was painful to watch leaders like Governor Greg Abbott and El Paso Mayor Dee Margo blame the shooting on mental illness and argue that this atrocity was committed by an outsider. It was just another way of whitewashing," noted Romo. But this was a white crime against people of color. And I've got mixed responses, from that. And David has told me that he feels that he's been living in a war zone for a long time, but it's kind of like a kind of a low level.
Right.
Sometimes they'll have a big explosion like the massacre, or something big will happen, but you kind of realize that you're in a war zone. And I remember one thing that shocked me in Israel and Palestine, being in a lovely little restaurant and seeing teenagers with guns everywhere. It's odd. There's a beautiful garden, or there's a beautiful place, there's a beautiful restaurant. It feels just like it could be home in California, except these people, IDF, were just walking. It was a war zone. You're living in a war zone, and especially for Palestinians. What do you think about David, what he's saying there, that this has been going on for a very, very long time?
I think it's a mistake to think about this violence against Mexicans as part of the historical past, something as arcane and exceptional, when it's an everyday affair. And when we talk about violence, it's symbolic and it's real. So when, on a daily basis, We are denying children their languages, their cultures, their identities. They're leaving out their, their story from the curriculum, from the teaching. Then schools become symbolically violent spaces because it's not about who they are or what they bring, the wealth of their own cultures and identities that informs curriculum or educational practice, such as to convey in an everyday, seemingly benevolent way that they do not matter. And so when you have kids' language in jail, their culture in jail, their identities in jail, well, guess what? They're in jail. They're symbolically in jail. And so for those of us who are involved in these struggles, we see a real connection between the distant past and the present that reinscribes this hierarchy by dismissing them, dismissing children's and their families, their communities' experiences in ways that are so profound, in ways that contribute to a sense of alienation. What we know from the ethnic studies literature, one of the main findings in the scholarship is that it helps them to feel a sense of belonging. That's one of the main benefits of an ethnic studies curriculum.
I'm swearing at the plane.
Yeah, I know. I'm just saying that people say that what we teach is divisive. Actually,
Keep your eyes towards John.
oh, are we actually doing the interview right now?
Yeah.
I thought we were waiting for this to
Oh,
go.
okay, yeah. Well, you're continuing, so.
Yeah, I'm telling you what I
Or
want to
miss
say.
it, that's all.
I'm telling you what I want to say.
All right.
Yeah,
Scott,
go
let's
ahead. Go ahead and tell me what you want to say. We're almost there.
Yeah. What the research on ethnic studies, and by that I mean Mexican American studies, African American studies, all these different studies, what they show, the number one finding is that students, for the first time in their lives, when they hear this precious knowledge, they feel that they're part of the grand American narrative. They have spent their whole schooling in this space of not being important. And now all of a sudden, their story is what is featured, and they feel enhanced, more intellectually efficacious. They feel a sense of belonging, and it results in really positive results. Higher grades, finishing high school, going on to college, because they have that intellectual self-worth that they haven't had before, because finally what's in their minds and what's in their hearts is connected to what is officially regarded as what it means to be a college student, or what it means to be a high school student, what it means to be important, because the curriculum is working positively in your direction to affirm you.
That is such a powerful statement that you just had. I'm cognizant of the fact that you have a place to go. I notice a lot of times once the interview is over, the real interview begins, because people, but I really want what you're talking about to be in this documentary. So, if you could kind of, I know this is difficult, but you're summing up the kind of blogs, what would you want people to know about what you do and the significance of critical race theory and basically how we move forward? When I mean forward, when you see people resisting, we don't want to talk about 1619, we don't want to talk about racism, and I'm thinking particularly here of Texas and your responses that are going on there. How do we move forward?
I think we're going to move forward on this issue of critical race theory and on everything else, because when Republicans only have this to offer the American people, when they have no high-sounding rhetoric, they have no vision for the future, they have no proclamations that inspire, it means they have nothing else. It means they're bankrupt. I'm almost ready to claim victory, because they are not going to go anywhere from this. They have run the distance. White supremacy is akin to the dinosaur that's flailing in the tar pit. It's screaming its loudest because it knows that its end is near. And the world will be better for that. And they will be better for that as well. Because it's violent. It's ugly. It's abusive. It's angry. Why even run for office if that's what you want to do, is to not only not help the people, the children of Texas, but to outright abuse them and to demean them, treat them as if who they are doesn't matter. That's not a winning card. I am hopeful, and I think there's every reason to be hopeful, because if that's all they got, it's over for them, and they know it. And they know it. They've got to reimagine themselves, and hopefully in a way that will benefit all of us, humanity. Otherwise, they are not destined to lead the future.
Thank you so much for the interview. I thought you were great, and I think